Hey everyone, it's Alex, and today I'm here with my March wrap-up. March was kind of a weird month, and I feel like most people experienced that as well. It was just abnormal and strange and kind of stressful. So as a result, my reading in March was a little bit abnormal. Started out pretty normal, and then by the end of the month, I was reading only YA contemporaries via ebooks from the library. So my reading kind of took a shift there, but let's get into the 10 things that I read in March. First, I read The Light in Hidden Places by Sharon. This is a young adult historical fiction novel set in Poland in the 1940s. Stefania is a 16-year-old Catholic girl who works for a Jewish family. When the Germans invade Poland and the family is sent to a concentration camp, she starts saving Jews. It starts with just one, a member of the family she worked for, and then she starts adding more and more Jews that she's hiding in the attic. I gave this book 3 stars. I did enjoy it. It was definitely a fun read, an enjoyable read. It's the kind of book that I would have adored when I was like 14 years old, but I do think it was a little bit young for me. It's a YA book, but it's definitely the lower end of YA, even though the main character is like 16, 17, 18 over the course of the book. It's kind of geared towards like a younger YA audience, like 14, 15-year-olds instead of like 17 or 18-year-olds, and I think that rubbed me the wrong way. And I think one of the big reasons for that is that I really do enjoy younger books, middle grade books, but an issue I have is when the main character is older than the intended audience, because it does kind of feel like, I wouldn't say it's dumbed down, but it's kind of aged down a little bit for the audience. Like the things she's thinking and feeling, they feel like they're geared towards 14-year-olds instead of like the 18-year-old thoughts that she should be having. But I did enjoy it. It is fun. Like if you're someone who likes a younger age range, like it's definitely not middle grade, it's definitely YA, but if you like this kind of book, if you like books that are geared towards like 14 or 15-year-olds, I would recommend it. I would recommend picking it up. I think it was worthwhile. I'm glad I read it. I wish I'd read it 10 years ago, because I do think 10 years ago I'd have just adored this entirely. It's a good book. I found myself actually more interested in the true story that this is based off of. In the author's note, Sharon kind of went in depth on like what happened to the real Stefania and what happened later in her life, and I really enjoyed that, and that was like my favorite part of the book, but just not super for me, and I will link my full review for this down below, but very good book overall. I should also add that this is an arc that I got from work, and the book is now out and has been out for about a month by now. Next, I read The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi. This is an adult historical fiction novel, very big on historical fiction this month, about a woman who was a henna artist in 1950s India. Lakshmi ran away from an abusive arranged marriage when she was a teenager. She ran away to the city and she started being a henna artist, first for the women in the pleasure houses, and then for the wealthiest people of the city, the highest class people. And she's made a good living doing this, and she keeps trying to move up further. At the same time, she also works as an herbalist, specifically giving women herbs that cause an abortion. So that was a very interesting element of the story, but overall I gave this 3 stars. I didn't actually think it was that good of a book. Like, I did enjoy the premise, I enjoyed a lot of the aspects of the story. I really loved how much Alka Joshi delved into the caste system of India and what it was like and what people of different classes, how they dealt with each other. And I really liked her role as an abortionist and how she kind of dealt with that, and how the people around her dealt with that, and how they felt about it, how society felt about it, and really interesting elements. But I wasn't really a fan of the overall story or the writing. The writing wasn't bad, but it was one of those writing styles that didn't really add anything to the story. It didn't really help the story's cause at all. And the book itself felt a little bit surface level, a little bit fast paced. Like, there were so many aspects of the story from Lakshmi and her past and her relationship with her abusive husband slash ex-husband, and her sister coming to the city after their parents' deaths in order to find her, and Lakshmi trying to move up in her career, and there's a lot going on in this book, and I really did enjoy the overall story, but it just felt like there wasn't enough time for Joshi to delve deeply into all the different aspects of the story, so it felt like we kind of just skirted over the surface a lot of the time. It covers over a whole year in just under 350 pages, and it doesn't have any time jumps in that year, not really. It kind of just like skimmed everything briefly, so you get like a whole overview of an year in these people's lives, but it just needed more time. I think it needed to be slowed down. It needed to be a little bit deeper, and it wasn't bad, but there was no point during this book where I was like really, really enjoying it or really loving it. It was just kind of like I was interested to see how it was going to end, but I wasn't like really excited for it. And I don't know. I wouldn't say this is a bad book. I think if you're interested and you like a more fast-paced style book, you might enjoy it more than I did, but I just didn't think it was particularly good. This was also an arc that I got from work, and it too is out and available for purchase if you're interested. Then, for the February Free Readathon, I read the third book in the Circle Open series by Tamora Pierce, and that is Coldfire. This book I gave 4 stars. It's the only book in the Circle Opens quartet that I gave 4 stars. And it is about Daja, who is a 14-year-old girl in a city where fires are being set, where there is an arsonist who is active. And she, along with her teacher and her 2 new students, try to track down who this arsonist is. I really enjoyed this, like almost surprisingly so. I think Daja is an interesting character, but she's not my favorite of this series. This series kind of deals with 4 kids who have a special kind of magic. They have what's called ambient magic. Instead of just having magic within them, they have magic that's drawn from a specific source. Daja has magic that deals with metals and metalworking, and she is an ironsmith as a result. She has a bond with her 3 foster siblings, and in the series they've all split up and they're kind of on their own paths, dealing with their own students, and it's very interesting, but I do feel like there's often something missing in this series. But I really did enjoy this book. I thought it was incredibly well paced. It's kind of a mystery because she is investigating an arson and the arsonist, and it's kind of a huge deal because at the end of the book, whoever the arsonist is will be put to death. But you also know who the arsonist is fairly early on. It's not kind of meant to be a plot twist. It's just an in-depth look at these people and like what their lives are like and who they are as individuals, and it's really well done. Like, it's by far my favorite of the Circle Open series, and I was really glad to have one book in this series that I loved, because I know this isn't my favorite thing overall. It's a reread. I knew what to expect going in, but it's just a really, really solid book, and there's not really anything that I would have changed about this one. I just thought it was fascinating in all aspects. And then I finished off the series with Shatterglass, which is book 4, about Tris, Daja's foster sister, who is a weather witch. This deals with a serial killer who is murdering dancers and other entertainers in the lower city. I did like this. I like the story itself. I kind of found that it went along very quickly. It was very interesting, and I was interested in who the murderer was. It is definitely a series that's much more focused on the magic aspects than the crime aspects. The magic is the main plot, and the crime is kind of like a secondary feature. But I felt they were tied together really interestingly. Tris deals with a student in this book who has lightning magic, and that was really well done. I think the thing I had the biggest issue with in this book was that the culture was kind of iffy. Tris is visiting a southern country. I think it's meant to be inspired by India, and it felt very othering of the people who were actually in that culture. Tris is very critical of what's going on in the book. The narration is actually very critical itself of what's going on, and it felt very judgmental of like the culture as a whole. Whereas in Daja's book, she was actually in a culture that consisted mostly of white people. She was up north, and it was very interesting the way she was critical of the culture as well, but it was handled so much better. It was like she is an outsider. Like, Daja at times was othered herself in the course of the book, and it was just very well done and very like sensitively handled, the different cultures. And this, it didn't feel sensitively handled at all. It felt very much like this culture is wrong. This culture has a lot of things wrong with it. It's possible to critique the customs of the people and just like critique their culture without just othering them as a whole. And I felt like this book very much was just othering this whole group of people, and it did lean very far into the white savior trope kind of area. And this isn't the only one of Tamora Pierce's books that I felt that about, but I don't know, I didn't hate it. It was like that aspect made me uncomfortable, but the story itself was just like kind of enjoyable, kind of well crafted, and 3 stars overall. I am kind of glad to be done with the Circle Opens books, and very excited to continue on to the better parts of the series, in my opinion. And then via audiobook, I read Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I read this for a couple of weeks. I read the listened to the Jim Dale narration of it and really enjoyed it. I do have some issues with Jim Dale's narration. I'm not going to really get into Harry Potter or the story or whatever. This is just my thoughts on Jim Dale's narration. He pronounces some things very strangely. It drives me crazy every time he says Voldemort instead of Voldemort. And Hermione's voice is not well done, but like, it's Harry Potter. It's really interesting to listen to him speak. There are a lot of things I like about it. I really do like his voice for Remus and his voice for Sirius, and this is my favorite Harry Potter book overall. I gave it 5 stars. I do enjoy his narration, and the more I listen to it, the more I get used to it, and it's just one of those things, I think, where I'm not used to his narration, so a lot of the things he says and the way he says them kind of sounds wrong because I've heard it in my head for so many years and I've seen the movies for so many years, but I am enjoying my reread of the Harry Potter books this way. And then we get into most of the ebooks I read this month, because this was about halfway through the month, and this was the point where everything started getting stressful and my job got kind of iffy, and then a lot of things happened, so I just wasn't really in the mood for much reading, and all the reading I did was via audiobook on my phone at night when I couldn't sleep. So let's get into those books. The first one was The Wrong Side of Right by Jenn Marie Thorne. This is a YA contemporary novel about a young girl whose mother dies. She's 17, I believe, and a couple months after her mother dies, she's been living with her aunt and uncle because they're the only family she has, and then a man shows up. A senator in the United States who is running to be the next president. And with him comes a bunch of people who are all saying that she is his daughter. And basically you find out that she is his daughter, and she kind of gets involved in the family and involved with the press, and like, it's a big deal because he's running for president and the election is coming up. The book just kind of deals with that, her family situation, how she feels about it, and she kind of has a little bit of a romance with the son of the current president of the United States, who is running against her father. I gave this 4 stars. It's kind of a cute YA contemporary with enough substance that I could feel invested in, and it was just like the perfect thing for my mood. I saw this when I was at work one day and I was like, you know what? I want to read that sometime. And then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna read that right now. And I read it all in one night and I gave it 4 stars, and it was just the absolute perfect thing that I needed at that point. It was amazing. I loved it. I would highly recommend if you like YA contemporaries that are like family dramas and also a little romance and like there's substance and bad things happening, but also like, you know, it's going to be kind of okay in the end. It's one of those books, and I really enjoyed it. I think my main issue was kind of just that the politics was a little bit shallow, a little bit superficial. I wish there'd been a little bit more to it, a little more substance and depth, because I do think the politics wasn't well handled. It was just all very oversimplified. But I really liked the way that the main character dealt with the press and like how that was integrated into the story. I think if you've watched my channel for a while, you know that one of my favorite books of all time is The President's Daughter by Ellen Emerson White, and it kind of reminded me of that in a few aspects, like very, very different books, but the way Kate was dealing with the press, her name's Kate, right? Yes. The way Kate was dealing with the press, and the way there was like a huge focus on like what she wore and what she said and like the way she was interacting with them, and just like all these small things that you wouldn't necessarily, that weren't directly tied to politics, but were just like, oh, like how long is her skirt, like, because that really matters, and like what's it made of and what is she wearing, and like how does she look, how is her smile, and it's just like, it's really interesting to me. And I like the relationship with her stepmother. I think that was handled really well. It was just such an enjoyable book, and just like the perfect thing for me. Then I read The List by Siobhan Vivian, which I gave 3 stars. This is about high school. It's very high school drama. Every year there is a list, and there are 2 girls put on the list from each grade, the prettiest and the ugliest. So there are 8 girls on the list, and it kind of deals with the fallout of that, like what happens to the prettiest girl and what happens to the ugliest girl. The book just kind of goes from there. I gave it 3 stars. I did not love this book. It was just kind of barely 3 stars for me, and it probably hit 3 stars because I was very much in the mood for a high school drama, and this was kind of like the epitome of high school drama. I would say my biggest issue with the book was that there were 8 narrators, because each girl on the list was a narrator, and there were 8 of them, and That's a lot. It's not a very long book. I don't remember how long. I think like around 300 pages. But like for 300 pages, eight narrators is a lot. And there wasn't really much time spent with any of them. And some of them did feel like very filler. Like this girl is only in this book because the premise dictates that there have to be eight of them. And not so enjoyable for that aspect. And it did feel like it was meant to be like a lot of social commentary about like what it means to be pretty in society and what it means to be deemed ugly. And like it did feel like it was trying to be that, and then it just kind of like forgot to add any commentary. So it was just like high school drama-y. But I read this because I don't know how old this book is, but I feel like I kept seeing this book in high school when I was reading a lot of young adult contemporaries, and I was like, that doesn't look very good, but I am intrigued. And I've been intensely curious about this book for a very long time, so I am glad that I did finally read it because it sated my curiosity. So I do think if you're intensely curious, it's not like the worst book in the world. Siobhan Vivian is a good writer. It just wasn't a particularly good book, and there were a couple of characters I was invested in and like interested in their story, but like maybe three out of the eight, and it wasn't really very good overall. Then I read Girl Made of Stars by Ashley Herring Blake. This is another young adult contemporary. I don't remember their names. The main character has a twin brother, and her friend accuses the twin brother of rape. And it's a very interesting, very dark book. There's lots of graphic sexual assault if that's something that concerns you. I gave it 4 stars. This has received a fair amount of hype on BookTube, and a lot of people really love it. I'll say I didn't love it. I did really enjoy it. It took me like just a night or two to get through because I was really invested and really entertained the whole time. But I did feel like it was a little bit generic. Like I was always waiting to like really care, like really, really care. And I never quite did. It felt like I should have been very tense while reading this book because it sounds like a very tense book. It sounds like the kind of thing that like it should be causing me like a great deal of stress and anxiety and tension, like in a good way, because like that's what the subject matter is. And I didn't really feel that. I was always kind of waiting for it to happen and was always kind of like just out of reach. Like, okay, like you kind of know from the beginning who the main character is going to believe. You kind of know where it's going to go, and you kind of know what the end resolution is going to be. So there was always kind of, at least I did, and I was right in all of those things. And it wasn't really about that. It was just kind of about the journey. But it was all felt a little bit generic, and I didn't love it as much as I wanted to, but I did give it 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. I was interested in the story. I was interested in the characters. It just maybe wasn't like the greatest thing I've ever read, and I just had high expectations for it going in, so I think that's why this sounds more negative than I really felt. It was solid. Like, I would recommend it. I don't think it's one of those books that many people will have big issues with, unless you don't like reading about graphic sexual assault, but overall, it was a really good book. Then I listened to the Jenn narration of the audiobook for Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling. I gave this 4 stars. This is my least favorite of the Harry Potter books. It's not bad. I do quite enjoy it. I still love Harry Potter. But I don't like tournament style books. I don't like books that are like very focused on kind of a formulaic storyline. Like here is the first task and then the second task and then the third task and like point A to point B to point C. It does come across as kind of formulaic to me, and it comes across as very much like waiting for the next thing to happen constantly. But like I liked it. I love Harry Potter. I love this book. It's just, compared to the others, it is like the lowest on the totem pole, but I do still quite enjoy it, and it was a fun time. And the further I get into Jindale's narration, the more I do like him. He just takes a little bit of getting used to. And then the final book that I read in March was Jim and Dixie by Sara Zarr. This is another young adult contemporary that I read via ebook about 2 girls who are in a neglectful home situation. Their father abandoned them, and then he kind of comes back all these years later, and their mother does drugs and works a night shift, so she isn't around very much, and they don't, have food at home all the time. They don't have a lot of the things that like kids really require, and they come across a bag of money and kind of like run away together, sort of, and go on adventures and stuff with the money. It's a lot more down to earth and realistic than it sounds, but that is the gist of the plot. I gave it 3 stars. I do quite like Sarah Zarr. I think she has a wonderful sense of setting in her books. Like that's something that has always stood out to me, and that's not something that I would normally pick out of like an average book, but like her settings are always like so intensely graphic and so well done. Just like the cities that her books are set in, because she sets a lot in like Seattle and San Francisco, and it's always so graphic and so well done. And I really like her writing style, but this book was very much not the book for me. The whole premise of two teenagers kind of being on their own with a bag of money, and like you feel this stress throughout the whole book of like, oh no, what if they lose the money? What if they spend it on useless things and then they have to go home? And like, there's always like this stress, and not in a fun way for me. I found it really unenjoyable to get through, and I was just like unpleasantly stressed this whole book because of that. And that is my fault for going into a book literally not reading a sentence of description. I picked it up just because I do really enjoy Sarah Zarr. But it is really hard to enjoy a book when just the premise of it makes you so uncomfortable. But I enjoyed the characters a lot. I think they were really well crafted. I was interested in them and what was going to happen to them. It was just like the whole middle portion where they had a whole bag full of thousands and thousands of dollars. I really didn't enjoy. That's not for me. But I do think that if that doesn't bother you and you do like kind of a quieter kind of young adult contemporary that's kind of dark and just dealing with these kids in a stressful situation, that you might enjoy this a lot more than me, because I do love Sarah Zarr. I just didn't like this plot very much, and that's kind of why most people read a plot description before they pick up a book. But I am glad I read it, because I do think beyond the bag full of money plot line, I enjoyed the rest of the book. I enjoyed Jenn's life and like her trying to get away from her parents and like her struggles, her whole life, and it was really interesting. But those were the 10 things that I read in March. Let me know down below if you've read any of those and what you thought of them if you have, and stay safe, stay inside. Try not to stress too much. Like just let's all try to like pretend that we're all happy and life is normal for a little while. I think that's what I'm trying to do right now, because there's not so much I can do outside of that. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.